question of the historicity of Jesus Christ should ever be raised has a strange sound in the ears of a Christian. That there should be even the slightest doubt as to the life on earth of the founder of the religion which he has accepted and is undertaken to make his rule of life is quite beyond his comprehension. Did Jesus live? Did such a man 1900 years ago teach the most precious truths ever spoken by human lips? Did he perform the most marvelous works of all time? Was there such a man? Did Jesus live? To the Christian, those questions are meaningless. They're absurd. Not so to the unbeliever. To him who has looked upon the Gospels with critical, perhaps with cynical and a doubting eye, with such the query is raised with what to him seems excellent reason. He would probably scorn to accept and disdain and become the follower of one about whom so little is really known. That is, about one who has so small a place in the history of his own times. It is to answer the doubtful one, the dissenter, that there are briefly placed before him here the evidences contained in history itself. What then is the place of Jesus Christ in early history? What are the proofs, apart from the scriptural record, that such a man ever lived? Well, in the year 110 AD, Pliny, a younger Roman proconsul of Bithynia, a province of Asia Minor, wrote to his emperor such an account of the happenings of his province as it would be an interest in the government of Rome. Pliny was a literary man of note, serving in the capacity of Rome as a Roman overlord. Perhaps the salary attached to the office and a subsidy which enabled him to continue his literary labors. In one letter to the Emperor Trajan, he asked for instructions as to what course he shall take towards the Christians. He tells of the rapid growth of the devotees of a peculiar religion who sometimes assemble to sing a hymn to Christ as their leader, or God is the term. As a worthy official of the empire, eager and instant in the repression of any group which might become a menace to the welfare of his country, he has called certain of these strange worshippers to his quarters and questioned them. Some quickly repudiate the charges that they were given to the worship of strange gods, and pour a libation and burn incense to the emperor. Others refuse, and because of their stubbornness, they are tortured. As Pliny wrote this soon after the end of the first century, it is probably the first extant historical mention of the followers of Jesus Christ. It establishes the fact of the existence of that time in Asia Minor of bodies of Christians, that their numbers were increasing. Thus is substantiated in secular history in the various missionary activities of Paul and the others in Asia Minor, as related in the book of Acts and in Paul's epistles. To those requiring evidence apart from the gospel narrative, here is the conclusive proof of the development of a sect whose founder bore the name of Jesus Christ. Another Roman historian bears even more convincing testimony. Tacitus, a contemporary of Pliny, writes of the burning of Rome when Nero was emperor. To not deny the rumor that the fire had been set by himself, the emperor charges that the Christians are guilty of the crime, and he puts many to death. The account states that the origin of the name was one Christ, who in the reign of Tiberius was condemned to death by Pontius Pilate, procurator of Judea. Tacitus also relates that in spite of the repressive measures taken against him, this revolting Superstition developed anew, overflowed Judea, its birthplace, and extended even as far as Rome. The charges of arson were not proved. The accusations were shifted to the sweeping assertion that Christians were enemies of the whole human race. Sounds familiar, actually. Tacitus was known for his accuracy. That Christ had been crucified was not a mere rumor, but a historical fact. But impartial historian that he was, relating objectively the common belief regarding the situation, that his heart is touched by the horror of the persecutions, is apparent from the passage which follows. Guilty though they were, as much as they merited death, the fact that they suffered not for the common weal, but through the ferocity of one man, awakens pity for them in all hearts. Here again is the proof that goes still further, for it deals with Jesus himself. Moreover, it brings to the surface the great fact of the inevitable enmity between the empires of the world and the kingdom of spirit. Is it eternal enmity, one that will endure so long as evil, through its innate conceit, believes it can overthrow the kingdom of good? How little has humanity awakened to the great fact that only good is omnipotent, and by that very token, evil is impotent. That is, in its efforts to destroy good. Contemporaneous with Pliny and Tacitus, but alive with a decade longer than either, was another Roman historian, Suetonius, who wrote biographies of both Nero and Claudius. He too makes mention of the persecution of the Christians. In his Life of Claudius, he writes, "The Jews, incited by a certain Christos, continually rebelled. He, being Claudius, drove them out of Rome." Here, manifestly, the word Christos represented a distorted form of Christus, meaning Jesus. Tertullian also wrote of the followers of Jesus as Christians, indicating that this was an uncommon term applied to the followers of Christ. One would expect that the famous Jewish historian Flavius Josephus would have dealt more fully with Jesus in his career than the later Romans. Josephus was born shortly after the crucifixion and lived until near the end of the 1st century. It should be recognized that Christianity was but a small movement during the period of Josephus' life, and it's quite understandable that he should have paid so little attention to it when writing an exhaustive history of the times. We are inclined to judge the importance of Christianity in all the centuries from its great development and influence today. Obviously, an improper standard of judgment for 1st century happenings. The antiquities of Josephus are but 2 references to Jesus, one bitterly hostile, the other so friendly as to stamp it as most certainly a letter interpolation by some Christian hand. But the authentic one, notwithstanding its lack of understanding of the character of the man whom it denounces, has the definite and unanswerable result of writing Jesus into secular history. There was such a man, Josephus' words are. Festus was now dead, and Albinus was but upon the road. So he assembled the Sanhedrin of judges and brought before them the brother of Jesus, who was called the Christ, whose name was James, and some others. And when he had formed an accusation against them as breakers of the law, he delivered them to be stoned. In these words did the Jewish historian fix the fact that Jesus lived and the followers were persecuted, although his facts are not in accord with the gospel narratives, which probably were written somewhat earlier. Other and very important evidence that Jesus was also an historic personage is found in the Talmud, the holy book of Jewish law. While several references are all critical, hateful, in view of the spotless character of the Nazarene, yet they furnish irrefutable proof of his historicity, of the man who names the Christian era. The character of the references perfectly illustrates the type of enmity toward him, whose only mission was in doing good, in relieving humanity of its burden of sin and sorrow. Just a martyr of the Hellenic birth, who became a Christian in the first half century of the 2nd century, also knew of the Jewish accounts of Jesus and his followers. The weight of the combined statements constitutes irrefutable proof of the historicity of Jesus. It fixes him as a historical character entirely apart from the gospel statements. Apart from the 4 Gospels, readers of the book of Acts and the epistles of Paul are convinced from these accounts that alone that Jesus lived